Summer's fading away. A chill begins to fade through the air. A very, very mysterious fog begins to illuminate the rest of everything around it while also making it hard to see. Sorry, I'm terrible at analogies. Point is, it is the best season of the year, ladies and gentlemen. It is the month of October, the Halloween season, if you will. A season where I get to just go absolutely nuts with my horror fanaticism. Yes, I'm making that a word now. And just completely drench myself in everything horror, Halloween, spooky, scary, etc., etc. It's going to be a lot of fun, to say the very least. And for this year's 31 Days of Horror, I decided that instead of just reviewing new stuff like Bambi the Reckoning or any of that stuff, or Black Phone 2, or just that stuff, I decided that for this one, we are going back. We are going to go all the way back to the roots of the entire genre itself. Yep, I have wanted to do this one in particular for a while now, and it is finally the right time. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, in my horrible Bela Lugosi accent, to 31 Days of Horror, Monster-Mania. A marathon that will be entirely in black and white. And we will be talking about only black and white movies, specifically the ones from the 30s and the 40s released by Universal. So, grab your favorite box of Count Chocula, and let's get this started, shall we? I'm not going to do the accent the whole time, I'm just trying to get in the mood. Let's start, of course, with the movie that started all, and the first ever horror movie to have sound. Yes, I kid you not, that is a real fact about this movie. Let's start with Dracula. 1931's Dracula, directed by Todd Browning. And starring, of course, the legendary Bela Lugosi. And this won't be the last time we talk about Lugosi in this marathon. He is in a ton of other movies, most notably as Igor in Son of Frankenstein. But this is one of the only times he actually gets to play his most iconic role. And what's interesting here is the way that Lugosi has actually played Dracula several times before making this movie. And that is on the stage. In live stage performances, he was always Dracula. So he was already used to the cape and the look and the tone. So he had the prior experience to really help him sell in this role. And you can see that experience through every single moment he's on screen. Lugosi just single-handedly carries a grand majority of this movie with his incredible performance. Not only because he does a great job setting both the iconic look and Hungarian tone of this iconic character, but also because of just how chilling he is, how creepy he is, despite also having this sophisticated side to him as well, making him a dual threat, if you will. But he's not the only person that shines in this movie. We also have Dwight Fry as Renfield, and trust me, we're going to talk about Dwight Fry a lot in this marathon too, arguably even more than Lugosi, because Dwight Fry is in so many Universal Monster movies, it is mind-numbing. Not to mention the amount of times he plays a hunchback assistant in the Frankenstein movies. Most notably, of course, in the original where he plays Fritz, which we'll talk all about tomorrow. And then, of course, there's Edward Van Sloan as the first ever incarnation of the one and only vampire hunter, Professor Van Helsing. And obviously this won't be the last time we see him either, because if there's one thing you're going to learn about these Universal Monster movies real quick, is that they do reuse their actors a lot in other roles in other movies. Because you have to remember, this is the 1930s. People didn't have like $1 million budgets like we have now. Instead, they had to recycle and do whatever they could with the most little minimalistic of budget that they can. Kind of like how most horror movies nowadays, most independent horror movies nowadays, have to try to stay within that budget, but also try to excel a bit more than their higher budget, higher marketed counterparts. It is all a very, very interesting experience, if you want to put it that way. So those are the main players, and of course you have David Manners as John Harker. He's alright. And Helen Chandler as Mina, the girl that Dracula continuously goes after throughout the entire movie. Now, before I even get to the rest of the review, I think the first thing I should note about this movie are both its differences from the actual Bram Stoker novel, as well as some trivia and extra notes. So, let's go over those real quick, shall we? In the book, Jonathan Harker is the one who goes to Transylvania, but in the movie, it's Renfield. In the book, Lucy had 3 fiancés, Arthur, Quincy, and Dr. Seward. However, Arthur and Quincy are not in the movie, but Dr. Seward is. And, in the book, Lucy just outright died. Whereas in this movie, it actually took a couple of different blood transfusions to keep Lucy alive after her bite. But in the book, she just straight up died. And if I had to take a guess of why there were so many changes from this movie, from the book, is because of threats from Bram Stoker's widow. That's my guess, and that's the most well-known theory that I know of. But honestly, it could really be anything. Again, movie from the 1930s, this was before people started archiving things. A Spanish version of Dracula that we're going to review after we finish reviewing this one was filmed simultaneously with that of Todd Browning's Dracula, the one we're reviewing currently. In these early years of sound films, it was not uncommon for production companies to develop multiple versions of the film. You have to remember, at this point, the only vampire movie that really existed, technically, that wasn't lost to time or media, was Nosferatu. And that movie was the silent era. There was no voices, there was no voice acting. It was all just music and physical body language. And that movie is still pretty chilling. If you have not seen the original Nosferatu, you need to. It is a gem. I'm pretty sure I reviewed it back when I was also working up to reviewing the newest version of Nosferatu from Robert Eggers, which kicks ass, by the way. If you haven't seen that version, absolutely check it out. But yeah, interesting that back in these days, where most of the time nowadays, to get a different language, you just get different voices to dub over the already pre-existing footage. Whereas here in these movies, and specifically here in Dracula, they got an entirely different cast that speak Spanish, and they didn't dub over anything. It's actual Spanish actors playing the Spanish incarnations of these US characters. Wrap your head around that. It's a pretty tangled web it weaves. The Spanish version of Dracula was produced by Carl Laemmle and was directed by George Milford. And Carlos Villarreal played the role of Dracula. We're going to talk about him in a minute. He is so good in the Spanish version of Dracula. Here's an interesting fun fact for you. Originally, silent film star Lon Chaney Sr. was considered for the title role of Dracula, but Chaney was under contract with MGM at the time, and regardless of those contractual obligations, Chaney ended up passing away from throat cancer on August 26th of 1930. Yeah, he literally died with the silent era. Pretty freaking chilling when you learn that, isn't it? And then the role eventually went to Hungarian stage actor Bela Lugosi. Ironically, Lugosi would go on to star in Mark of the Vampire, which is a remake of the lost vampire movie London After Midnight, starring, guess who, Lon Chaney. It is a pretty interesting tangled web that these movies weave. There are conflicting accounts regarding Lugosi's language capabilities during the production of Dracula. Many sources cite that Lugosi knew very few words in English and had to recite his lines phonetically, without really understanding what it was that he was saying. Other sources have claimed that Lugosi's English was as refined as it was ever likely to get. it's pretty interesting, to say the least. Some of the theories and stuff that people try to make about this movie, despite it being, decades old. Carl Laemmle, niece of producer Carl Laemmle Jr., makes an uncredited appearance as a coach passenger reading from a travel brochure, and she has the first lines in the entire movie. And the only sound score in the entire original movie, not in like the re-releases and stuff like that, consists of a piece from Swan Lake. Yes, the entire movie, it's in its original, most unedited, uncut incarnation, had only one piece of Swan Lake music the entire film. And a grand majority of this movie's music that was even added with that, it's still used very minimalistically, because a grand majority of this movie is just silence and the actors acting. And you'd think that sounds boring, but trust me when I say it is anything but that. The piece is also played during the Opera House sequence. During the 1930s, it was not uncommon for early sound films to not use film score, because again, this is like the earliest days in all of filmmaking. It's really fascinating. I highly recommend you start doing deep dives for yourself, because I can't go into every single little bit of that here, as fascinating as it is. In 1999, Dracula was then fully scored for the first time by Philip Glass and the Kronos Quartet, and this was first made available on the special edition VHS tape, specifically the one that's in the Classic Monsters collection. One of the most incredible collections of anything ever, seriously. If you have a chance to get any of those very rare VHS tapes of these movies, do it. They're all in such incredible high quality art and sleeves that it makes your entire collection just look a million times better just by it being there. I kid you not. Like, go look up pictures of it right now if you so desire. They are really, really beautiful works of art. And Laserdisc versions of Dracula, please excuse me. It has since been included on the Dracula Legacy Collection DVD and the Dracula 75th Anniversary Special Edition DVD. And finally, for facts and notes, during the symphony scene, Dracula hypnotizes an usher into telling Dr. Seward that there is a telephone call for him in the lobby. The nature of this call, or why Dracula had the usher inform Dr. Seward of it at all, are never explained. Presumably, again, this is where theories come into play, Dracula was arranging to have Renfield admitted to the sanitarium so that he could keep him close by. Hence why he was in the sanitarium after the whole scene on the boat. In a following scene, though, Renfield is shown as a patient at the asylum with no explanation as to how he got there. In a bit of a weird time jump. Yeah, you have to remember, this is the 1930s. People did not have, like, super refined scripts and think about this kind of thing back then. But still, it's pretty interesting. Okay, now we'll get on to the actual review. I'm sorry, I gave a lot of trivia and facts there, I'm sorry, this is just one of those movies, again, like a grand majority of all these Universal Monster films, that you have to do some extra research, because there's so much that goes into every single one of these that, as much as I tried to make these reviews a deep dive, which I'm definitely going to try to do to the best of my ability, there are still things I'm not going to be able to go fully in-depth into, because it also clashes into, like, theories and overall history of filmmaking and stuff like that would take hours to explain at length. And since my phone does not have that kind of storage, unfortunately I'm kind of, for lack of a better term, up shit creek on that department. Okay, now it's time for the actual review. And this is probably going to be the shortest part of this entire video, because it's pretty simple, straightforward, and to the point, because this is a movie from the 1930s, so here's the review. It has been way too long since I've done a movie review, and now that it's the greatest and spookiest time of year, now's as good a time as any. However, instead of just reviewing new stuff like Bambi the Reckoning or VHS 8 Halloween, super freaking excited for that movie, especially after how great Beyond was, I've decided this month to review some of my favorite movies of all time by tackling the iconic and bone-chilling and beautifully atmospheric classic Universal Monsters. excluding the first Wolfman, since I already reviewed it back in January leading up to the latest Wolfman that we got in that month. A movie that people really, really hate that I personally did not mind that much. It's an okay movie. With it out of the way, let's begin our journey into the funky cemetery with Dracula. This movie is significant to the history of the entire horror genre for multiple different reasons. Lugosi's incredible performance that also established Dracula's signature look and Hungarian tone. Like, dude was literally buried in his actual Dracula cape. If that don't scream dedication, I don't know what is, because he's dedicated even in death. The first horror movie to include sound and dialogue, as again, the only movies we had up to this point were Nosferatu, and even more notably, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, one of the favorites of one Rob Zombie. The mix of both impressive and laughable effects, displaying the low budget. Impressive as in all the backgrounds you see in this movie, of like the mountainscape and stuff like that. Those are all glass paintings. Pretty amazing when you learn that, isn't it? And laughable, because of course this is the 1930s, so you are going to have those effects that will look cheap and very bad by today's standards, such as bats on strings and cardboard on lamps. You have to remember, very different time period back then, so even if it is funny, you do have to keep that in mind. Phenomenal, minimalistic music, and very creepy atmosphere. In the words of James Rolfe in Massacre, this is a movie that kind of feels like you're going into a dreamlike state. Like, first you see, Renfield going up to Castle Dracula and being warned by the villagers not to go up to Castle Dracula. Then he gets there, meets the Count, and then from there, he ends up getting turned into Dracula's slave. And then you have the whole thing on the boat where Dracula murdered the entire crew, which that's pretty dark in of itself, even if it doesn't show it on screen. And then, of course, you have Dracula trying to steal away this one guy's fiancée the entire movie by any means necessary. And then, of course, in the middle of all this, you have Van Helsing, who is the one that actually makes Harker and everyone else believe that vampires actually exist. And another interesting fact about this movie is that this movie actually gave Dracula some powers that he actually hasn't used in any further reincarnation, to my knowledge. That being that he can actually shapeshift into a wolf. Make sense of that, how you will. Yes, he doesn't shapeshift into a bat in the entire movie. And that he also has hypnotism. Which, some incarnations kind of play around with the idea, but they don't really have him actually fully have this hypnotic ability, which is interesting. Again, another weird thing about this movie that somehow just makes it even more timeless, despite being from, again, the 1930s. Where were we? Sorry, I lost my spot for a second. The elaborate sets. Castle Dracula is an incredible set. Not only for its time period, but just in general. Not only because it does an amazing job just setting up the mood and the atmosphere immediately, but also because of all the scenery, and even with the laughable bats on strings, you still get a bunch of that really rustic, old school vibe and look. And the black and white only excels it even further. Once again, it's like going into a dreamlike state when you watch this movie. Like the movie itself is holding you in a trance. It's really, really fascinating. And of course, it's an astounding amount of changes from the original Bram Stoker novel, which we already went over. But there's a lot of other amazing things in here too, such as Dwight Frye's unsettling performance as Renfield. I was not at all prepared for how terrifying this dude was. You don't see him kill anybody or anything like that, but he still immediately sends your heart into your stomach. He is terrifying in this movie. He starts out as just, a, a good meaning chap that's going up to a castle. And then, as soon as he becomes Dracula's slave, flips the switch, and he becomes a crazy, maniacal psycho. And the flip that you see of him from that point onward is terrifying. Like, to the point where you're like, oh man, this guy has actually really lost his mind. And I mean that in all the best ways. Right? This is, in my opinion, Dwight Frye's best performance, still. Look, I love him as Fritz, as I'm going to talk about at length in tomorrow's review, but man, I freaking love him as Renfield. Like, he did such a good job with such little to work with. The lack of music adding to the mood, the dreamlike pacing. Like, the movie's pacing is fast because this is still a very short movie, because this is before movies were even trying to push 2 hours back then. You were lucky to get 1 hour movies back then. So the movie's pacing, it's fast and brisk, but it doesn't rush. Again, it's much like going into a dreamlike state. The side characters, they're not great, but they do their job and they do enhance a grand majority of the main players in this movie. And its perfect runtime of barely an hour, which makes it endlessly rewatchable. However, that being said, though, it's not perfect. This movie does still have some faults, so that's why I'm not giving it like a 12 or an 11. The Harker storyline is kind of boring. No offense to the actors, but this storyline I just had no interest. And the movie's most damning aspect, the ending is very anticlimactic, as Dracula dies off-screen. You don't get to see Van Helsing stake him. You only hear the sound of him putting the stake through with the mallet, and one scream of Lugosi. That is all you get. You don't get to see him, like, turn to dust or disintegrate, or actually see him, like, bleed out from his wound. You know, like we see vampires die in movies nowadays. Again, standards of back then compared to the standards of now. Those are just all minor things, though, because the rest of this movie is so good, even today, that it's able to overcome its faults. And it's a very strong start to the Universal Monsters legacy. I adore this movie. Not only because of its atmosphere, its pacing, and Lugosi, but also because it's easy to watch, it's brisk, and it is the perfect movie to get in your spooky Halloween mood with. Because it's kid-friendly, because there's no gore or swearing or anything like that, so you can realistically just put this on for your kids to watch, and it will still give them that creepy feeling. And it's a movie that even creeps out adults to some extent because of characters like Renfield. So it's a monster movie that I think works for all ages and is aged like a fine wine. And of course, it is the first horror movie to have sound and dialogue, which will then become a huge thing going forward. Like, no matter what is your favorite horror movie of whatever decade or whatever, you owe respect to this movie for being the first to actually give you sound. If it weren't for this movie, we'd still be in the silent era. So, final verdict for the US version, the more well-known and iconic version, of 1931's Dracula, is a 10 out of 10. It may not be an 11 or a 12 because of the Harker storyline being boring and because of Dracula's very anticlimactic death, but the rest of the movie is so fascinating and so rewatchable that it makes up for any of its problems. It's a damn good movie, plain and simple. You can watch it with your family, you can watch it with your kids, and it'll get you in that perfect creepy Halloween mood. Like, make sure there's no other sound on. Watch this movie for by yourself or with others in the dark and the quiet. That's as spooky as it gets. However, we're not done. As I stated earlier, there is a second version of this movie, the Spanish version of Dracula. And unlike movies nowadays where it's just, Spanish actors dubbing over American footage, like Power Rangers and Super Sentai, here it is a completely new cast and a completely different language. because of the cast that speaks that language, and only primarily that language. But it's the same set and the same scripts. However, what's more fascinating is the way that this movie actually tries to one-up its American US counterpart and its production value. Let me explain. Now, interestingly enough, there's actually two different versions of this movie, as Universal actually shot a Spanish version simultaneously using the same script and sets, but a different cast and a different crew. But what's even more fascinating is how it actually one-ups its classic English version in a few different ways. The production value is a lot higher here. Like, you know that one scene where we see Renfield ascend up the steps to see Dracula? Well, in the Spanish version, you actually have the camera being a POV of him walking up the steps to see Dracula. Not to mention the lighting is brighter, and you get like an incredible sweeping zoom in into Dracula. Like, it is just higher production values all across the board here. And it is incredible to watch. Like, if you've seen the original 1931 US version, check out the Spanish version. Like, it has its own unique, like, perks and different additions that make it stand out from its original counterpart while also being almost just as great. Pablo Alvarez Rubio is actually even more bone-chilling and terrifying than Renfield in his manicness. Yeah, Pablo Alvarez actually outdoes Dwight Fry. I'm not going to say any more than that because I don't want to spoil the experience for anyone that has not seen this underrated gem yet. There's far less censorship, with some more violence, no blood or anything, but you get to see a little bit more violence, and even a little bit of cleavage, because since this is Spanish, and Spanish, especially back then, do not have the strict, uptight standards of US releases, they could show a little more. So, for example, the long silver nightgown that you see Mina wear in certain scenes, in the outside scenes when she's starting to get possessed by Dracula, in the Spanish version, you actually see a bigger cut that exposes her breasts. I'm not saying that to be a perv, I'm saying it because it's an actual fact, and a big difference from the original version. Again, like I said, we're going deep dive with this, man. They added some new scenes to enhance the story, like there are a couple scenes in here that were not in the original American version, and they actually enhanced the movie's story a little bit. And Carlos Villarreal, apologies for mispronouncing your name, is so good as Dracula that he actually rivals Lugosi. Like, from his face to his mannerisms to just his overall body language, it's like right up there with Lugosi. He's amazing as Dracula in this movie. It was genuinely surprising seeing how he portrays Dracula for the first time. It is so damn good. It's no wonder why this was labeled in the Universal Monsters Classic VHS collection as a collector's treasure, as a limited edition, because it's a great version of Dracula that has its own excellent additions that make it stand out from its more well-known counterpart without coming off as a full-blown copy. Like, yes, it uses the same script and the same sets, but everything else is entirely different, and it makes the movie a lot more interesting of a watch, especially if you're watching it back-to-back with the original well-known US version. Definitely worth checking out if you love foreign horror. Like, if you're one of the people that doesn't have a problem with, like, language barriers or anything like that, or doesn't have a problem with reading subtitles, this is a movie you should absolutely check out. It is just different enough from the original Lugosi version to be almost as significant, if not even more significant, because I think this was also one of the first, like, foreign country horror films, too. So, final verdict for this one is also a 10 out of 10. Yes, I am going to prefer the US version more, mainly because of Bela Lugosi, but that is not to discredit this version or Carlos Villarreal's incredible performance. Seriously, check this version out, man. It is worth your time. And with that, that's going to conclude our first installment of 31 Days of Horror Monster-Mania. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you're all having a great start to your spooky season, whether it be spooky or poppy. Yeah, because K-pop Demon Hunters apparently counts now, so what the hell do I know? Anyway, thank you all so much for watching this video. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more like it almost every single day. And stay tuned because we have a ton more spooktacular treats all throughout the month to look forward to. So, until next time, I am Jack Small of Animation Station, and I will see you next time for the iconic Frankenstein.